we have a page for a book, and we can see the book title, the thumbnail, the author, publish date, description, all that. But this is something that everybody sees, no matter whether they're logged in or logged out, who the user is. It's the same view. What I want to do in this video is add some kind of a personalization over here where you can mark a book as something that you've read, something that you're reading perhaps, or if you already read it, you can mark it as like, okay, this was a 5-star book, or this is a 3-star book. I didn't finish it. Like, those are the options that I need to show in this page so that people can mark a book as read or didn't read. So this is kind of one of the features of Goodreads, where you can add books to your, currently reading list. And, once you've finished reading, kind of rate it in a scale of 1 to 5 stars. All right. So that's what I want to do. And this is going to take a little bit of work, both in the backend and on the page itself. Okay. Because the thing we need to think about is, what is the data going to be saved as, right? We are going to save this data in Cassandra, right? We want this to scale. So when somebody loads a book page, we want to show the rating for that user for that book, all right? So we want to have easy access to the rating and all that information given a book ID and a user ID, all right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to create a table in Cassandra, which is retrievable based on 2 keys, right? One is the book ID, the other is the user ID. Given those 2, I want to be able to get the rating and, did they finish it or not, right? Something that associates a user with the book, okay? I'm probably going to call it like Userbooks because there is really no proper name for it. Like read books, it doesn't make sense because the user might not have read it, right? The user can mark it as did not finish. So it's something that ties the user's interaction with a book. Okay, that's the data that we want to save. And I'm going to call it Userbooks. And I'm going to start building it by creating that model class, all right? We're going to do the model and repository so that we know there is a way to save it as well as retrieve it. And once that is done, we will see how to integrate it with the UI, right? Have it show up in a page like this, possibly have a form over here where they can enter this information when they save. It is going to go save as a user book entity, right? It's basically data with a certain book ID and a user ID. All right. So how do we do this? First, I'm going to start by creating that user book instance. All right. That user book model over here. And I'm going to create a new package I'm going to call it user book. Maybe Userbooks, because there is more than one book that a user can read. And I'm going to create a new Java class here. I'm going to call this Userbooks. And this is going to be the model class. This is going to contain the data for a single user and book combination, right? Given a user and given a book, what is the data that's associated with it? So I'm thinking about the data that we would need. We would need the start date and the end date, when the user started reading it, when the user finished reading it, a rating, 1 to 5 stars, and then possibly a status, right? Did the user finish it, or did they give up, or are they currently reading? I think that would help as well. If you were to do like reviews, then this would be a good place to add a review for a particular user. Not going to do reviews for this for the scope of this application. I'm going to store possibly the started date, completed date, the status, whether they finished it or not, didn't finish it, and then what is the rating that they offered, all right? So that's what I'm going to create member variables for over here. The first thing that I'm going to need to create is the other keys, right? So I need to have 2 keys. One is the user ID, and the second is the book ID. So I'm going to put the add table annotation here, which is the Cassandra table. I'm mapping this as a table. And then the value is going to be, I'm going to call it book by user and book ID. All right, something like this, book by user and book ID. Okay. It's hard to name things. I'm just coming up with this. Basically, it's like the book information by given a user ID and a book ID. Okay, so that's the best I could do. All right, so I'm going to have two primary keys here. I'm going to have the private string user ID and then private string book ID. All right. These two are going to be the primary key columns. Okay, so I'm going to just copy the stuff from what we have over here. Let's say book. What do we call this? This is kind of how this should look like. All right, so I'm just going to copy this over here just so we can refer to it as we type the code. Okay, this is going to be the primary key and partition key, and this is going to be user ID. And then similarly, this is going to be another partition key, and this is going to be the book ID. All right, I'm going to have this ordinal 0, ordinal 1, and both of them are partition keys. Right, we fix all the imports. What are we doing here? Name. Well, this has to be the Cassandra type. Okay, so I have imported those things. So these are the two primary key columns. We don't need this. So given a user ID and given a book ID, we're going to save a bunch of things. First, what is the, let's say, reading status, right? We want to save whether it is, currently being read or finished reading status. And I'm going to make this text just fine. This will do. I'm going to have the started date and the end date. So I'm going to copy this date column over here and use that over here. Started date and then completed date. All right. I'm going to have the same values, the column names, but the underscore convention, which I've been doing throughout. Completed date, and of course, import local date. All right. And then the final thing that I'm going to save is the integer rating, right? It's going to be 1 to 5, but I'm going to just save it as an int, private int rating. And this is going to be Cassandra type dot int, not list, int, and then I'm going to call this. Okay, so these are the things that I need to save for a given combination of user and book. I'm going to generate getters and setters for this thing, for all of them. Okay, and I think I have a problem here. The repository pattern expects you to specify two types in the key, right? The first type is the entity itself, and the second type is the primary key. So, for example, here in the, let's take the book repository, right? So we had two types over here, right? The first one is the book type, which is the entity itself that we need to fetch. The second type is the primary key in that book type. Okay. Now, we don't have a single type here for this guy, Userbooks. Okay, we have two. We have the user ID and we have the book ID, which is not going to work. So what we need to do is extract this out and create a primary key type for this. All right. So let me do that next. I'm going to create a new class here. I'm going to call this the Userbooks primary key. Okay. And this is going to contain the two fields that make up the primary key over here. I'm going to extract these two and them here. Okay. And of course, fix all the imports. Now, when I'm creating a primary key class like this, I need to annotate it with the @primary key class, which is from the Cassandra package, Cassandra core. You see this? So Spring Data knows that this is a primary key. And now I don't think I need anything else here. I'm just going to generate getters and setters. And that should be it. So here I'm going to have that primary key referenced over here, private user books primary key. Just going to call this key. And then I can annotate it with that primary key so that, again, Spring Data knows that this is a primary key. Okay. Again, what we did was, rather than have it be in one place, I'm extracting the key type and putting it somewhere else, right? So I'm going to put it over here, and I'm annotating it with the primary key class so that Spring Data knows that this whole class is a primary key. It's not an entity. It's not mapping to a table. Okay. And over here in my userbooks.java, I'm making this as a primary key, and then it's of type userbooks primary key. Okay. So we have to do one more step in terms of getting the book ID and the user ID, right? Given a book ID and user ID, how do you fetch user books? Well, you don't just pass those two IDs directly. What you do is create an instance of the userbooks primary key, put those IDs in it, and then give that as a key, right? When you do a find by ID, you're probably going to give this thing. I don't remember the actual API. We'll find that out. But this basically acts as a key, right? This object of this instance, the userbooks primary key instance object, is going to act as a primary key. So I have the model here. Next, let's switch to the repository and create a new repository here, Userbooks repository. Okay, and this is going to be an interface which will extend Cassandra repository. And what are the types here? The entity type itself is userbooks. And then the primary key type is userbooks primary key. Okay. And we have the repository as well. Now with this, we are good to go in terms of, fetching data and saving data. We now have a repository. All we need to do, like if you want to save, user A read book B, and then they saved it as 5 stars, what do you need to do? You just need to create an instance of user book with the corresponding IDs for the user ID, book ID, and then say repository, have it persist. That's simple, right? Now, the next challenge is to get this functionality in the UI, right? We want to have that form show up here in the UI, and of course, map it to a Spring MVC controller, which is going to pick that up and then issue that save command to the repository so that it gets persisted. And also works the other way. When you load a page where the user is logged in, you're loading a book, and this is a book that they've already interacted with, right? Either they rated it or they saved it, they didn't finish it, whatever, right? We have to fetch that information from the database, from Cassandra, and then save it over here. So for those two reasons, there are a couple of steps we need to take. First, show the form here, right? So that people can select stuff and then submit it. Once they submit it, there has to be a Spring MVC controller which is going to retrieve it, which is going to get that request and then persist it to Cassandra. Okay. Next, in the book controller, when we load the books, like when I'm refreshing this thing, right? I'm loading the book. Oh, cut the server down. It loads the book, right? When the server is up, and it is going to get the book information from the database book repository and display it. But that's not enough now. I also need to make a call to the userbooks repository and see if, okay, here's a logged in user. Has this person, he or she, interacted about this book before? Have they rated it? Have they saved it? Whatever, right? I'm going to have to get that as well. So there are 2 repository calls that need to be made. Usually, I'm very careful when I'm recommending 2 repository calls to Cassandra, because think about everything we've been doing now. We have basically set up Cassandra tables to be in such a way, the perfect way, that every page load, everything that interacts with the user is basically just one fetch based on a key that too, right? No joins, none of that stuff. That's how we build highly scalable systems. So that's been our approach so far. But in this particular case, I'm going to be violating that approach by making 2 API calls. And I want to do this because really there are 2 ways in which you can load a book page. 1, the user is not logged in, it loads just the book page. 2, the user is logged in, it loads both the book data plus the user's interaction with the data. So there is a condition here. So we don't want to have 2 copies of book information denormalized, right? One is just the book, another is the book for that user. Not a good idea. So that's the reason why I'm okay in this particular scenario to make 2 calls to the repository, to Cassandra. But then these are, again, based off keys. So it's going to be very efficient. It is still going to be a very performant system, and it is still going to scale well. All right. So I'm going to start with creating the controller. All right. Let's start from there. I'm going to create the Userbooks controller here. And this is going to be a at controller. And let's say I have a method here, which is, I don't know what it returns. I'm going to mark it as a string here, but this is not exactly something that will return an HTML response. Let's say add book for user. All right. So this is going to be something that is called when there is a post request, right? Post mapping. And then the URL, I'm just going to say add user book. Okay. The goal here is to have a controller endpoint, like an API endpoint, where somebody fills in this data and then says submit on a book page. It's going to go here. It's going to make a post request. And then this is going to actually add that information. Since it's an add, it needs to be non-idempotent. So it has to be a post or a put. I have chosen post. I'm going to get into the whole conversation and debate about put versus post. Post for now. So here I need to do a few things. I need the book ID, the user ID, whoever is logged in, and then the information that the user has filled in, right? What they rate, what did they choose as a status and all that. When did they start it? When did they complete it? So for the user ID, well, that part is simple. We just need the authentication principle, right? We just need the at authentication principle. And then I'm going to call this auth2 user principal. Okay, so I get the principle because Spring is going to inject that for me. Now, for the other stuff, I'm thinking I might have to do the HTML form first so that I know what it is that's going to be sent. Usually with HTML, you get like this map. It's a multi-valued map that you can extract data out of, right? For example, you have like a form with 3 fields. When you submit it as a post, you're going to get those 3 values base mapped to keys as a map. Okay. So let me actually pause this here, and I'm going to actually switch now to the HTML side of things, and I'm going to create that HTML in the book.html file, right? So if we go to resources, book.html, this is what is rendering this guy, right? Let me start this so that you know what's happening here. I have to fix the getters and setters because I removed the user ID and the book ID from this class. Okay. Let's run this. Okay, I'm going to have to comment this stuff because I'm putting this on hold, and we will tackle this later. I'm going to just run this now. There seems to be an error. It's telling that these are registered as IDs, book ID and user ID. No, these are not IDs. Why does it think that they're IDs? Because I've told them that they're IDs. Okay, these shouldn't be there. Okay, the @ID annotation doesn't apply in a primary key class. That was the error. That's why it was failing. Okay, so I'm going to try running this one more time. Okay, we get this. Now, what I want to do here is add a form if the user is logged in. The user is not logged in. We're not doing that. So what we need to do is have the information about whether the user is logged in or not when the book page is being rendered, which means I need to go to the book controller and add something on the model saying, okay, this is a page render from an authenticated user, or there's a page render from an unauthenticated user. I need to send the data when the book page is being rendered, all right? So I'm going to go to the book controller. That's where I need to do this. I'm going to close everything because it seems to be a lot of stuff, and at this resolution, I'm finding it hard to keep track. Okay, book controller.java. Over here, I'm going to add the same thing, the authentication principle, all right? Authentication principle auth to user principle. All right. I'm asking Spring to tell me, hey, give me who the logged in user is. I want to know if the user has currently logged in or not. So I'm going to let me actually do this after, right? I'll get the book finished with the necessary things here. And then this is an optional step. Okay. The principle is an optional step. So I'm going to say if principle is not equal to null and principle dot get attribute of login, because we know that this is what gives me the login ID on GitHub. Okay. So if the login is not equal to null, which means that I have a login ID. So now what I'm going to do is add that to the model. I'm going to say model dot add attribute login ID, and it is going to be login ID. All right. So I'm going to get principal or get attribute of login. Put this over here. All right. So I have the login information sent as a part of the model. And of course, I need to do this before I return the book. Okay. And here I can use this in my book.html. All right. When I'm rendering this book, I can add something here if the login attribute is present. I'm going to do this by adding a form tag here. And then I'm going to do a th:\if, which is a way for me to conditionally specify if an HTML element gets rendered or not. So I want this form to be rendered only when there is a login ID. So that's the reason why I have this th:\if here, and I can specify what is the value that I need this to be contingent upon. So I'm going to put this standard syntax, the $curlies, and I'm going to have login ID over here, right? And then I can add the action. I'm basically going to do the same thing that I did for the search. I'm going to copy that over here because I don't remember the syntax. It's in components, right? It's over here. The attribute is going to be the action that we are going to create, all right? Which is going to be the, what do we call it? User books controller. We call it add user book. I'm going to send this to that. When somebody fills this form, it is going to make a post request to add user book, right? And then the method is going to be post. This is the form. We have a form here that users can fill. It's going to contain like the start date, the end date. I'm again going to use the bootstrap control, copy paste again from bootstrap, all right? Let's see, forms. There should be this, I want this thing to be like the label in the top and then the control at the bottom. So I'm going to find a suitable place to copy that. This will do. I'm going to copy this stuff here and then paste it into the form. So now with just a random couple of fields, but these fields are going to show up only when the user is logged in, right? So let's test that once to make sure that it actually works like we expect. So here is the book page. I refresh, I get this. I have not logged in, right? So I just don't see the form. But I'm going to log in now by going to the home page and then clicking on the login button. So it establishes an auth connection and there is a session. Okay. So now if I go back to the book page, you see here, I get the form, right? Which is what we want. But now we want this form to be to contain different other fields. We want the start date, the end date, and the rating, right? So that's what I'm going to tweak this as next. I want this to contain for start date, for example. Start date, placeholder is going to be nothing. So not going to have a placeholder. And then type is going to be date. Okay, this itself is enough to tell the browser that is a date picker, right? Let's say start date. And then I'm going to put one more, which is the end date. This is also going to be a date picker. So now this should be date pickers. Perfect. So this is working fine. Now, what else do we need? I'm going to go back to the Userbooks to Java. Clean up the imports while I'm here. We have start date, completed date, not the end date. So I'm going to call it right. This is going to be completed date. Okay. And then what do we have here? We have the reading status and the rating. The reading status can be a drop-down here, and it can contain a bunch of values like, currently reading, finished, and did not finish. I think those three are fair values to have. So I'm going to, again, pick this up from Bootstrap. Start arrange, select. Okay. I'll pick this, or maybe one with the, yeah, this should do. Okay, form select. And then this is going to be reading status. And I'm just going to call this status. And then this is going to be currently reading, finished, and then did not finish. I'm going to change the value as well to be a reading, finished, and then I'm just going to call this DNF. Okay, because the values here are important because this is what's going to get saved in Cassandra. If you remember the user books here, I have reading status as text. I don't want to save numbers 0, 1, 2 because what if the numbers change? What if I add one more status in the future, right? We don't want to have the orders mixed up. So that's the reason why I'm going to explicitly save a string for each of these reading statuses. Somebody's reading currently, it's going to say reading in the database, right? I prefer it so that it allows us to change. It allows us to add more statuses and not be bound by the order. If instead of reading, I would save 0, it means that reading always has to be in the 0th position. I cannot change it in the dropdown because database has all that saved, right? If I change this, I'm going to have to run a script on the database and update all the records there, which is painful. So I'm actually saving the string itself. Okay, here, I'm going to go back to the book.html and let's see how this looks now. Okay, status. Oh no, this is not what I want. I'm actually going to have this be, this is selected. Let me actually put a value here because what if somebody equals, I'm going to put this as 0. So if somebody selects this, it's going to go as 0, which means it's not selected. So that way I can enforce that something is always selected. All right. So this is status. And then I'm going to have one more for rating. Okay. Well, this looks like a bad name. I'm going to have status here, and then this is going to have ID equals status. This one's going to be rating, and then this one's going to be ID equals rating. And the ARIA label is going to be rating as well. So this one will need to have 5 options, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each rating. And nothing will be selected. Or maybe I can have a selected value 0 and then say select rating, which is going to be the default option, which basically says, hey, choose a rating. And then I'm going to have option value equals 1. And then this is going to be rating 1. Similarly, I'm going to have 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I'm thinking it'll be nice to have like the star itself. Let me show you what I'm talking about. A star Unicode. Don't remember what the Unicode is for star. We will see. What is this? U2605. U plus 2605. This is a good star character. Okay. I'm going to copy the HTML code here, which is the HTML Unicode. And I'm going to paste that over here, right? So this is 1 star. This is going to be 2 stars. This is going to be 3 stars. 4 stars. 5 stars. Now let's see how this looks. Rating. Hey, not bad, right? What I did was I just copied the Unicode HTML for a star, and then I put that over there. So now people can select how many stars they want to assign to a book. Simple. So here I have the fields, all the fields, right? I can say, okay, started reading it at this date and finished reading it at this date. And the status is finished. And then I'm going to rate this 3 stars. I read this book, but I still don't know how to do martial arts. So, 3-star rating. So now I need to submit this. I need a submit button. Okay. So I'm going to have that over here. After the div here will be a button. I need type equals submit so that it submits a form. This is inside a form, right? This guy. So it has to have type equals submit. And then I'm going to have the class equals button primary, which is the standard bootstrap thing, btn, and then btn dash primary. And then this is going to say submit. All right. Refresh this one more time. Now you see there is a submit button. And this again shows up only if the user has logged in. If the user is not logged in, it's not going to show. Now, when I do this and I enter these values and then submit, it is going to go to that post mapping over here. We don't have this. We need to uncomment this so that we have a method which accepts that form submission. What is this method going to have as an argument? It needs to have that multi-valued map, right? I don't remember that thing, so I'm going to say string MVC for submission multi-valued map. I know that it's a multi-valued map, but good old Stack Overflow help us here. Well, there you go. Request body, multi-valued map of string and string form data. This is what we want. All right. So I'm going to have that as an argument here. So it's going to be 2 arguments. One is let's import the stuff. One is the request body, which is a multi-valued map. It's basically a map of key to value. Okay. I'm just going to say return an empty string just to keep this error away. So this is the method signature, right? When a post request is made, it is going to come over here, and each of these keys is going to be the form entry, and then the value, the form label, and then the value is going to be the form entry that the user has entered. Okay. So let me actually do sys out of form data, and let's see if this works. I'm going to go back here. Refresh this, pick a couple of dates, some status, some rating, then submit. It's going to give an error, which is not surprising, but did it print something here? Nope, doesn't seem to have printed any errors. But there does seem to be an error. It says it is forbidden I feel like it could be because of the need for cross-site request forgery token, right? What is that? Whenever you're making a post request in an authenticated Spring MVC application, you need to make sure that it isn't some arbitrary JavaScript which is creating the form and submitting it on account of the user. Okay. It's very easy for somebody to inject a JavaScript and then they create their own form and then they submit all the necessary information, not to that server that you're interacting with, but to some other server, right? So there is cross-domain blocking, there is cross-site request forgery blocking, and all that things tend to get blocked. And I know that for forms like this, when you're making a post request, you have to have the cross-site, the Csrf token in the form, okay? So what I'm going to do is look that up. Spring MVC form post request. I think it's Csrf token. Okay. Let's see here. This is the official Spring documentation we're looking at. This has some pretty good information about Csrf in general and what you should do. Okay. So when you're doing this, you need to include Csrf token. Okay, here it is. I need to include this input here. Okay. What is this? It is a hidden input file, input property in my form. And it's basically saying, here is this unique token value that this form is sending along with it to kind of prove to the server that it is you who actually rendered the form. Okay. It's a secret token that only the server knows. And, it expects the HTML page to include that token in every post request. So when the post request gets to the server again, it's going to see, okay, is this a legitimate request? By looking at the server token, it has to have an input, it has to have one attribute, key attribute, and the value containing the token. So I look at that and go, okay, this is from a page that I rendered myself because it's returning back a token that I sent and nobody else knows about that token. Okay. So I need to add this token in here, this input in here. So I'm going to put this underneath the form right here. Okay. And this is going to add the Csrf parameter name and token. And this is, I'm not setting this. I didn't set this in the model. It is a part of Spring Security. So it is going to get sent with FD request. So I don't know if this works. Let's try this. Okay. I'm going to send this, couple of other values. I don't have to enter everything. I'm just going to click submit. All right. So this still says forbidden. So I'm going to have to look at what's going on over here. An easy way to do this, just for development purposes, is to just disable Csrf. Okay. So if you go to security adapter, so you see here, this is the thing which is configuring cross-site request forgery policy, right? So you see here, it says Csrf. It is cookie Csrf token repository. Okay. So this is what is enabling Csrf, right? I can actually remove this. I can basically say, hey, disable Csrf. I can do a .csrf .disable. And it is going to basically remove Csrf, remove expectations for Csrf. We'll wait for this to load and see if that solves the problem. Again, you wouldn't want to do this in production. I'll see if I can get around it. Let's say, refresh this, fill some value, submit. Okay, so this is working fine now. You see this? Now I get an error saying it's not able to resolve any template. It should have printed out the multi-valued map over here. The reason it's erroring out is because my controller returns an empty string, and I don't have a template map for an empty string, obviously. So it should have printed the body, right? It's printed this, but it just has a Csrf parameter name and token, which is not quite what I wanted. That is probably because of this. It should be th:, right? Because it has to evaluate this and not send it as is. This is the Thymeleaf syntax. But this is not what we want. We don't want the Csrf to be disabled. So I'm going to enable this thing again and remove the disabled part. If you want to skip it, you can skip it, but it really doesn't take much. All it takes is adding this input value over here with name being the parameter name and value being the token. And you have this underscore Csrf on the model for free when you have enabled Csrf. Okay. So I'm going to run this one more time and see how this goes. I'm going to go back to localhost 8080, make sure I've logged in. And then I know there's no login confirmation. That is fine. I'm going to go back to this book. Okay. I'm going to pick a couple of dates. Status is finished. Rating is 4. Submit. Okay. So I get the error now, which says that it's not able to find the template, but you notice that it is going to the controller, right? It doesn't say forbidden anymore, right? Because previously it forbade, I don't know English. It prevented the request from going to this controller because of the lack of Csrf, when we had enabled Csrf in the security adapter. Now we have enabled Csrf to what is getting sent. So it is printing this out and then it's returning an empty string, and Thymeleaf is saying, hey, I don't know what to do with that empty string. We have got the post request going. Now what we need to do is do something with that post request, right? We're going to have to construct the user book entity and persist it to the database. So I'm going to get that over here. I'm going to do autowire user book repository. User book repository. Okay, so this is going to get auto-wired here. And now I can create a new instance of userbook based on what I have over here and then send it across. All right, so what do I need for userbook? So userbook equals new userbook. Userbooks. Is it singular, plural? Okay, it's plural. Userbooks. All right. So Userbooks has a bunch of things that I need to set. The starter date, completion date, rating, and reading status will come from this form data. Right? We're literally sending that data over there, so it'll come from there. So I'm going to say userbooks.set starter date. And what is the starter date? I need to get from the form data, right? So I'm going to say form data dot form data dot, there is a get, and get returns a list of string because there could be multiple keys, I guess. I just need the first one. I'm going to choose get first. Get first of start date, right? Is that what I have here? Start date. Okay. So this one needs to be name as well. Okay. So I'm going to get these over here. Name equals. This is start date. This is completed date. All right. It needs to be the name for me to pull that up from the form. Similarly for this one, this ID equals status, name equals status. And then here, ID equals rating, name equals rating. Okay. Now here, I'm going to do form data.get first of start date. There's going to be a string. So I'm going to have to do local date parse. All right. I need to parse the start date. Similarly, I'm going to do this for the completed date as well. This is completed date. Okay. I've set the start date and the completed date. Userbooks dot greeting is going to be, again, form data dot get first of greeting. Okay, well, there's going to be a string. So I'm going to do integer dot. All right, and set status, reading status to be form data dot get first of status. I don't have to do any conversion here because this is already a string. Okay, so I have these things over here. Now, I not only need those, I also need to save the primary key. Okay, userbooks dot set. Whoops, I don't have that. So let me actually create that. I need a getters and setters for the primary key. I don't have that here yet. All right, so I'm going to do source action, getters and setters, and here are getters and setters for the primary key. Now I need to create this instance because it's not just a primitive value anymore, right? So I'm going to have to create userbook primary key equals new userbooks primary key. Okay, and then now I can set key of the key. All right. Now, how do I populate this thing? Key dot set user ID is simple, right? I'm going to get this from the principle. So if principle, I'm going to copy this from the book controller because I have a similar if condition over here, which is this guy. All right. So if this is the case, I'm actually going to do the opposite, right? So if principal equals null or principal.getAttribute of login is equal to null, then I should basically get out of here, return. Okay. Just going to say return now because this should ideally not execute, right? This should be basically the first check that I perform. If this method is being called when the user is not authenticated, just go out of here. Okay. So here I can set the user ID to be principal.getAttribute of login. I'm going to get that login ID from GitHub, and then I'm going to set it there. The other part, key.set book ID, is going to be tricky because we don't have the book ID here in the form. There are a couple of ways we can handle this. We can, I think the easiest way is to just create a hidden form property which contains the book ID so that when somebody says rated 5 stars and submits it, the book ID comes with the form. It's hidden, so the user is not actively entering it, but it comes along for the ride. And here we can access, oh, this is the user we know, and they rated it for this book. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to create this book ID as a hidden input. Okay, just like I have a hidden input here for the Csrf, I'm going to have one more hidden input for the book ID. Name equals book ID, which is what I'm going to be using to refer in the controller, and th:\value equals, when I have the book and I'm getting all the book information here, I'm just going to get the book.id here. So I'm going to get the book ID over here as well. Okay, so it's a hidden input, but then it is useful because it's going to send me the book ID that I can use in my controller. And now here I'm going to basically do something like this. Form data.get first of book ID. It is going to be available to me. Now I'm going to set this over here. And now I have all the user books. I am going to, like all the properties for that user book, I'm going to say user book repository dot save of user books. Okay, this thing is bothering me. It should be camel case. I'm going to say rename symbol. I'm going to call this user books with B caps. Okay, that's better. All right, so I have this user books saved to the user repository. I need to return something. What I was thinking of doing is basically redirecting to the book page. Okay, there is a way you can redirect to the book page, and I do that not by creating a separate string return type. I do a model and view return type. Okay. What the model and view return type does is allows you to specify, a redirect if you want, right? For example, I can say return new model and view of a redirect. Okay. Redirect :/books/ and then I can specify the book ID. Okay. Which is this guy here. String book ID is this. And then I'm going to set the book ID here. And I'm also going to redirect to /books/book ID over here. Okay. So when the form gets submitted, it does the work. And then instead of returning an HTML page directly, it's going to return this model and view, which is basically saying, hey, redirect to /book/book ID. It's basically just kind of doing a refresh. All right. Let's see if this works fine. I'm restarting the server. I'll go back here. Reload. All right. I'm still logged in, which is good. Gonna choose a couple of dates. Status is currently reading, and I already know my rating is 4-star. Submit. Okay. I get a number format exception for the input string this. Why is that? Java number format exception. Because of a typo here. This should be rating. I'm taking a date and trying to convert it into an integer, which will obviously not work. Restart again. All right. One more time. I have a feeling it's going to work this time. What do you think? Okay. So it has refreshed the page. And of course, we're going to have to pre-populate this stuff with what we already have. But let's take a look at the database. All right. So select star from. Do we have that? We have this book by user and book ID. Okay. Book by user and book ID. If I do a select star, well, there you go. Here is me rating this book. This is my completion date. This is my start date. I'm reading this. And I thought I rated it something else. Why is it rating 1? That's not right. Because I haven't updated this. All right, so I'm going to change this to 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I am fairly positive that this is going to work, so I'm not going to test it again. So I have managed to persist a specific user rating into the database, and it is there. Now, what I need to do is when this loads, when the page loads, right? This page loads. I'm refreshing this page. This is the book controller. It needs to fetch this information, right? Now I've saved the rating and it gets associated with the book. And I'm saying refresh the page, right? So now when the page loads as a result of a refresh, or I come back later, I load this page, it needs to also see if there is a user book value, like rating or whatever, given a book and a logged in user. So I need to do that in the book controller. I'm going to go to the book controller. And here, not only do I need to get data from the book repository, I also need to possibly get data from the user book repository. If the user is logged in, I need to be like, has this user done any rating for this book? Okay. So I'm going to copy this and make this user book repository, user book. Is it user book or user books? I'm getting confused. It's user books. Good naming, Kaushik. Should be user books repository. Okay. And then fix the imports. So here, what I'm going to do is when the user is logged in, right? If there is a principal, where am I getting that? I'm getting that over here, right? If there is a principal, not only do I put the login ID over here, I am also going to check if there is something in the user books repository. Now I need to do user books repository dot find by ID. Okay, find by ID. What does it take? It takes the user books primary key. So I need to create an instance of that user books primary key. Key equals new user books primary key. Create a new instance. And now I need to set both the book ID and the user ID on it. The book ID is simple. This is basically this guy, right? Book ID. Already have it there. The problem with this is, well, no, it's not a problem. User ID is also pretty obvious, which is the login ID over here, right? So I'm going to get this out here. String user ID equals this. And then I'm going to set the user ID here. And I'm also going to set this over here. And now here I can do a find by of key, find by ID of the key. And this is going to give me an optional Userbooks instance. Okay, I'm going to get an optional Userbook instance. Now, if there is a Userbook instance, then I need to set this here, right? So I'm going to say if Userbooks dot is present, I'm going to say model dot add attribute. I'm just going to call it user, and then this is going to be Userbooks dot get. Okay. If it doesn't exist, I'm still going to put this value over here. I'm going to put the property here so that it basically has empty. Okay. So I'm going to say new user books so that it's there and the value is empty. So that I can guarantee use it in my Thymeleaf template and not have to check like if this exists, then do this. No if conditions, right? And just throwing in an empty object so that I can boldly fetch data from it, knowing that if it's not there, it's just going to be empty for the primitives. So now that I have this, I can go to my book.html, and over here, each one of these is going to contain the value with the th:\value. Okay. So I'm going to have date, input, type equals date, name equals start date. And then it's also going to have value, which is th:\value. Is how you kind of pre-fill the attribute of, break this down into multiple lines. This is how you pre-fill the attribute of a form, right? The input, pre-fill an input using this, right? So I'm going to say user books dot, what did I call this? Started date. Okay, started date and completed date. So I'm going to go here. Userbooks dot started date. I am also going to have completed date over here. Again, break this into a split line and add completed date. All right. For select, I'm going to use th:\field because that's what works for select. You don't get th:\value anymore. This is th:\field. It's one of those Thymeleaf things because it needs to set which one of these is going to be selected, right? As opposed to just putting the value over here. So this is going to be status. And then this one is going to be rating. Don't close the select. All right. So I'm going to refresh this. Template error happened. What is the error? Invalid property status. All right. What did I call this? I called it reading status and rating. Okay, so I'm going to make this a reading status. Okay, that's what it's called. Reading status. This is reading status and this is rating. All right, save and try to reload this thing. Oh, there you go. It is rendering all this stuff. Now, if I were to change this thing, it should basically go to that same controller, save this data, and then reload the page. But now when it reloads the page, it's going to hit the book controller and it's going to say, okay, I know that this is a logged in user. It's going to go get this information and save it to Userbooks. And then it will have the updated value. I'm going to click submit. You see here, it has the updated value. And now if I refresh this as well, it has the updated value. I'm going to go to another page, another book, which I haven't read. See, this is empty right now. I'm going to choose some values here. Let's go to 2020 and choose this date. It took me 1 full year to read this thing, but I still did not finish it because, oh man, I don't like Excel. I give it 1 star and then submit. Now it has, say, well, this thing isn't quite working. It should choose this but it isn't working, but everything else seems to be working. Let's take a look at status. What's happening to this guy? Let's see what's going on. We've got the status here. Go to book.html. Yeah, I think this is the problem. th:'field. The name needs to be consistent. I guess this doesn't matter, but I need to pull up the value that the th:'field is using. So this needs to be reading status. All right. Let's try this one more time. I'm going to go log in first, then go back to the book, then set status, submit. All right. It's picking this up now. Okay, so we have the form in place, and it is allowing us to enter this data. I don't have any validation for the start date being earlier than the completion date. I'm going to leave that as a possible exercise for the viewer. Feel free to send me a PR. So we have this in place. Now, what we want to do is show the list of books that the user has had, right? So right now it seems to be very much, the flow isn't elegant, right? What we want to do is have like a homepage when somebody is logged in where they can see all the books that they're currently reading and kind of add stuff to it as they read more books and as they add more books to their currently reading or finished reading list. So let's tackle that in the next video where we're going to create that entity. We need to save this information, right? All the books read by a user. We're going to save that in Cassandra, and we're going to see how to display that in the view in the next video.